Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, a gray, grim Friday here in Boston. No sunlight in I don't remember how long. But Friday all the same, when all us bookworms on BookTube pause and think about the state of our reading. How are things going? What did you finish this week? What are you reading right now? What are you planning on reading on the weekend or next week? I should say that bookworms tend to do this, but not a lot of booktubers tend to do it. I wish that booktube were filled with Friday reads on Friday. I think one of the reasons that it's not is that people mistakenly think that if they don't have a whole bunch of new stuff to talk about, then their Friday reads would be boring. That absolutely is not true. Absolutely, you have the proof that that's not true right in front of you. Look at Sarah, the book schnitter, makes a reading report every single day, and she has thousands of subscribers. So you don't have to worry about it. We're not here for that. We're here for you. Ironically, however, I have lots of new stuff to talk about. But I am not a normal case. I do nothing but read. That is not normal. So I want to go through a few books that I either haven't read or have read or I'm planning to read or whatnot, and we'll see what we make of them, see if any of them are of interest to you. Now, those of you who might be new to my channel, there are very few who are new to my channel, because we are never going to get to 16K. We don't want to get any closer to 16K than we already are. So it's mostly us old friends here. But if you're finding this video in the future, I am a book critic. And not in addition to that, I have set the limits of my reading in the way that all readers do. In one way or another, they all do. The limits that I've set, the bailiwick that I've set for myself, is largely new releases. Probably 80% of my reading is new releases in the American book market in the 15 or 16 genres that interest me. So, which is why there's a lot of new releases in this Friday Reads. There are a couple of older books, but that's why you're seeing these, because that's mostly what I do. The first one, boy oh boy, this is an author I know she has a crowd of adoring fans. I've been reading her whole career. I don't see it. I just don't see it. This is the new book by Anna Quindlen. This is after Annie. And it's a thin little thing, but all of her books strike me as thin, regardless of their page count. Just, I don't know, maybe one of you is a diehard fan of her books. Maybe you can teach me how I can like these things. I seem always to get them at the wrong point. And as a result, they always strike me as just saccharine and underfed. And this did too. There are a couple of books on the list this time around for this Friday Reads where I suspect that I was coming to the book at the wrong time. The only thing is, with the other examples, I can imagine what the right times would be. And this, I cannot imagine. Maybe I should just say this author is not for me and just leave it at that and not read anything more. But that seems like just a betrayal of what I do. And I've also had it happen that I thought an author was not for me, and they eventually became for me or whatnot. So I'm always hoping that will happen. And this next one is a little older. I don't remember what caused me to pull it down off the shelf. I've got pictures on the iPad of all of these things instead of, well, some of these things I read as print and paper books, but I have pictures just for ease, instead of rabbiting all around the place to make a pile of things that'll frighten the bean. This is a little bit older, but I thought it was terrific when it first came out. I read it again to see, it's not in the headlines anymore. I wondered what my reaction be. I'm glad that I did. This is Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. And it's about, in a broader view, it's about all the institutional behaviors, including the eponymous magazine policy of catch a story that's bad for someone you like and kill it. Don't run it. Just bury it. All these institutional policies that are designed to protect predators. The focus of the book is Harvey Weinstein, and it's huge amounts of damning detail in here on him and a lot of other people. And I'm glad that I reread it, because I'm glad specifically that it's not in the spotlight anymore, to the limited extent that it's not. I mean, I think probably on some subliminal level, the reason that I pulled this down off the shelf and read it again is because not only did a New York judge adjudicate that Donald Trump, the god of one half of the country, not the political candidate of one half of the country. He's a religious figure. He's worshipped by one half of the country. Not metaphorically. He's literally worshipped as a religious figure by one half of the country. Is a rapist. A New York judge adjudicated that he is a rapist. You know, we can word it however we want in the jury verdict, but what this means is that he's a rapist. Not only that, but also for being a predator, he has been inflicted with nearly $100 million in damages that he can't pay. His worshippers, his church is going to have to raise that money because he doesn't have that money. And it will go higher. Of course it will go higher. the news programs in America are making so much hay out of the fact that once he got that second defamation suit, he was fined $5 million for defaming E. Jean Carroll. And the next day he defamed her again. And I know in the shattered remnants of what was ever a brain in his head, he was thinking, well, okay, I had a trial, I got a verdict, very unfair, but I paid it, so now I get to defame her. I know that's what he was thinking. He has no concept. He's really stupid. In addition to being evil, he's really stupid. I guarantee you that's what he thought. Well, we went through this, and it was settled. It was a phony verdict. It's a witch hunt, but I paid. So now I get to defame her. That didn't happen. He was sued a second time, and the jury this time around said, the $5 million was for defamation. Most of what we assign you now is going to be punitive damages because you didn't pay attention. You don't get to keep doing this. And they gave him a whopping $83 million. Huge chunk of that is punitive. And so far, he has not defamed her again. And that's led the commentariat to just go wild with stories and speculation. He hasn't had an opportunity. He hasn't had the kind of opportunity that he wants, which is a big, sweaty, long, rambling, psychotic Klan rally. The next time he has that opportunity, probably in Iowa or in the Midwest somewhere, a swing state, maybe Pennsylvania, he will defame her again. And this time, he will be sued again, and this time the judgment will be $500 million. Not $80 million, not $5 million, but $500 million. Because he can't help himself. But maybe the fact that that is in the headlines, because he's the world's ultimate known sexual predator, maybe that's what caused me to pull this down from the shelf. But in a way, I'm glad that Harvey Weinstein is not in the headlines anymore, because it allowed me to focus on what a good writer Ronan Farrow is. He was really good at crafting the narrative. No idea how much help he has to do that. Maybe he's that way on his own. But I enjoyed it. Grim subject, but I enjoyed it. Then we have a new release. This is by Lillian Monroe, and it was served up to me somehow. I got the ebook somehow. I don't quite know how. It's book 3 in a series, and I don't know if I have to read the other 2. I haven't read this yet. The series is The Four Groomsmen of the Apocalypse, and this one's called Combat. And I can't say with 100% certainty that I know who that cover model is, which will not be true for this whole list. But the premise here is kind of unusual, where there's the young woman at the heart of the story makes wedding invitations. She isn't sending out wedding invitations for her own wedding. She makes the invitations for other people, and yet a rival has threatened her life, so she needs a bodyguard. It's not the usual thing that you would expect, that someone in that line of work would need a bodyguard, but she does. And the story's going to go from there. I imagine that this will be, well, we'll see. I'll give it a chance. But contemporary romance like this, where you've got the party colors on the cover, and where the word grumpy is used to describe the male lead, typically they're very much of a muchness. They're loaded with forced obscenity. They're incredibly raunchy by chapter 3, and there's a kind of payoff at the end. I mean, this is an old story. This is an old gimmick in romance novels where a couple is not expecting to fall in love. We're going to counter it again in this Friday Reads. We'll just have to see how well it's done. I have to confess, there's so much of this stuff out there in the indie world, and even in the mainstream world. There's so much of it out there, more than even I could read in a million years, that I sometimes start to just enact no-fly zones for sometimes. I can see the day coming when I will encounter stuff like this, and if I encounter in page 2 a blizzard of forced obscenity, I just say no thanks. I'm not a Victorian blue stocking, where I'll just start to develop that. Okay, are you going to do that? No. Are you, the character's going to be one-dimensional? Well, I'm not going to read on and see what you do with your one-dimensional characters. I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to stop doing it. It could easily be, but I should not say that in regard to Combat, because I haven't read this yet. It could be utterly charming. Then this next one, I'm going to take a book from Sarah the Bookish Knitter here, who is notorious, one might say, for reading books in series out of order. I have done that as well in the past, and she and I probably share the same philosophy when it comes to why, which is, it's your job. If you're the author, it's your job to make it comprehensible to me. Now, in her bailiwick is romance, and romance novels in series tend to be fairly watertight. It tends to be that you're risking a lot less to read a romance novel, a romance book, out of sequence. The ladies who write these things tend to make them fairly self-contained. But the truth is there for any book in a series. If I pick up the latest book in a series, whether it's book 2 or book 22, and I don't understand anything that's going on, that's your fault. It's still a book. It's not a chapter in another book. It's still a book. You as an author have to make that at least comprehensible enough to hook me. If you don't, well, this book is not the first in a series. I was feeling, if I remember correctly, this is the second in the series. I don't know how it came to me, but I will be reading it. This is E.J. Simon, and the book is Death Logs In. I think this is book 2. In a series about a guy who inherits his brother's crime family. The main character is not a criminal until he inherits his brother's crime family, his brother's crime operations. His brother apparently is killed by a rival. But is he dead? And the main character has a leggy but lethal bodyguard and a whole bunch of other characters that revolve around him. I don't know. I don't think I've ever read the first book in this series, or the first 2 books in this series. I know what my no-fly zone might be for this one. I'll still read it. I haven't imposed those no-fly zones yet on any of this stuff. I want to be as open-minded as possible in case I encounter something I really like, which happens on this list. But one of the things that's going to bug me, and every reader is like this, every reader has a list of things, hopefully a short list, where if you encounter in a book, almost certainly you and that book are done. Right? You're certainly like that. I try to have very few of those things because I'm a critic. I like to keep reading in the hint of surprise, and because in the back of my mind, even though it's not going to happen, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that I'm going to render a judgment for readers on everything I read. I should get a lot closer to that than I am, but I don't yet. But even so, one of my no-fly zones is when the personality or the likability of a character is supposed to blind us to the fact that they are, in fact, a criminal. If the main character in the story takes over his brother's crime operations, he becomes a criminal. He should be dismantling them, not taking them over. Moral relativism, in other words, was of course going to bother, a spawn of the Jesuits. But we shall see. We'll see if it's any good. Then this next one I also have not read, but I know the subject really, really well. So this is a new history by James Swanson of the Deerfield Massacre. A very vivid cover here. A really, really oft-chronicled, well-written about, well-known, well-documented incident in colonial New England. Listening to this channel, it would be me and Mark Richardson who would be able to tell you about the Deerfield Massacre, but I haven't read a book on it in quite some time. In fact, I don't think I've read a standalone history of the Deerfield Massacre since the 1960s. If there have been some, I might have missed them. Of course, I read The Unredeemed Captive, which is a really, really good book, but I always think that we'll see what this is. What is this going to be? Is it going to be just a forensic reconstruction? Is Swanson going to examine it a little more in light of other massacre narratives and abduction narratives? We'll see. We'll see what kind of a job he does. I'm always up for it. This next one, I did read. It's contemporary fiction. It's called 14 Days. It is yet another kind of homage to the Decameron by Boccaccio. Only this one is a COVID Decameron. Yeah, it's a group of people retreat to the roof of their apartment building during COVID. And they haven't known each other. They're urban neighbors of a type that, stereotypically you don't know your neighbors in a city. I tend to know more of my neighbors than most people because I'm very outgoing. As you may not have guessed on this channel, I'm a chatty, outgoing old coot. And forever and ever in this neighborhood, I have also been seen at all hours of every day, all the time, out walking adorable dogs. For years and years, it was my girls, it was a beautiful pointer who was very happy to meet you, and also the world's cutest, fat, dumb, crazy basset hound, my Lucy, who plodded along like a little hippo on our walks and became known. Lucy became known in the neighborhood. And people would stop, and I love to chat with people. Love to. I don't just talk about the weather. I want to know, how's it going? How's work? All that sort of thing. Which means I tend to know a little more of my neighbors than most people do. But the gimmick of this book, you can see the cover is poor, right? What is going on with that building? You couldn't have drawn the building correctly, even in a cartoon. But the gimmick here, the underlying gimmick is that we don't know our neighbors. And these neighbors come to know each other by talking about their lives and telling stories up on the roof to pass the time while they're in quarantine during COVID. Pretty good. as an organizing principle goes, I'm kind of amazed that I haven't read a book like that already about COVID. But the gimmick of this book is that each of the stories is told by a different author of contemporary fiction. And they don't put their names on them. You get some names on the cover here, but they don't put their names on the stories. One of the gimmicks of the book is you're supposed to be able to guess, or try to guess, who wrote each thing. And boy, oh boy, I know that what you're expecting is I'm going to say that it was really easy to guess who did what because some of these contemporary authors are so much worse than some of the others. But the main impression I had when I was done with this book was how bad our contemporary writers are, just across the board. How bad they are. To the point where when you get halfway through this book, you don't care anymore about who wrote this or who wrote that. All you're thinking about is, why are all of these so bad? Now, defenders of this book, and I'm sure you're going to get them in the New York Times and the Washington Post, will say that if such a criticism applies to this book at all, it's because these are dashed off efforts. These are little stories that the individual writers weren't going to make into books of their own, so they didn't really care. They were left-handed exercises. Excuses like that for a book like this, a collaborative book like this, will be made under the impression, the stupid impression, the uninformed impression, the historically illiterate impression, that collaborative efforts like this have never been done before. They have been done before, many, many times, in the 20th century, in the 19th century, even in the 18th century. So it's possible to say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that tossed-off exercises for a collaborative effort like this don't have to be bad. We have many examples of them. They don't have to be bad. Now, it's not the examples that are bad. It's our authors who are bad. So many of them are bad. Anyway, I don't know that I'm ever going to review this book. If you see it excessively hyped, you might want to steer clear of it. Because trust me, by the middle of the book, you're going to wish that all these people were just throwing themselves off the top of the building instead of going on to tell their stupid, self-indulgent, navel-gazing stories. Okay, then this next one is one we've seen on this channel before. I can't remember if I showed you the actual print and paper book, or if we saw it as an ebook or whatnot. But this is Peter Jackson, but not that Peter Jackson, not the great director Peter Jackson, but the historian. And this is From Genghis Khan to Tamerlane. It's all about Mongol Asia, big sprawling history of Mongol Asia. Very well done. Very enjoyable, but unevenly done. The whole of it is well done. But oh my, this is in large part a book about Tamerlane. And it's true that those parts of it are terrific, just terrific. So if you're interested in sprawling history, I strongly recommend this. I wish that it had been longer. Okay, this next one is a graphic novel. You can't claim that I'm not getting the full experience of it because, despite what hipster snobs might say, graphic novels were made to be read on a tablet. They really were. Pinchable artwork, bright colors, massive amounts of screen resolution, that is infinitely better than fumbling your way through a graphic novel that is printed with a pasted spine, so that you have to crack the spine of the thing to see all the artwork, and you have to squint real hard to notice it. Better, by far, to look at a graphic novel on a screen, unless the graphic novel isn't all that good. This is a graphic novel of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is, I think, the third graphic novel of The Hobbit that I have seen. Some of you will be familiar with the really famous one from decades ago. They never really work. And I'm not quite sure that I know why. Illustrated Hobbits work, but graphic novels of Hobbit never do. I wonder if that's just because this just isn't the story for a graphic novel. If you didn't know anything about The Hobbit, but you were given the outline, you would change that outline for a graphic novel. A lot more would happen, and a lot more would be distinctive. I'm not using this as an example to denigrate The Hobbit. Of course, I'm not doing that. What I mean to say is I'm not sure how much the artist and writer here could have done anything with their material to make a good graphic novel. This was kind of a boring graphic novel. I think about it in terms of we saw a graphic novel on this channel about an old insane asylum. An old hospital. It was turned into a quack cancer ward. I forget the name of that. It was all in sepia tone. I folded some of the pages for you. That is a perfect example. That the creator of that thing, well, it had never been a story. And he wanted it to be, he originally envisioned it as a graphic novel. So it worked. On every panel, it worked. Whereas this is so clearly, I don't know. It was a Tolkien effort that didn't really work for me. I was bored a lot of the time. And I'm never bored in The Hobbit. Then we have something by Jared Cohen. I think I showed you this before, but I finally sat down and read it. I had an obvious reason to read it. It's called Life After Power. And it's a look at a handful of U.S. presidents and what they did when they left office. And there is a chapter here on the only U.S. president who left the office of the presidency and eventually became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That's William Howard Taft. He has a whole chapter of his own here. Naturally, that's the reason that I was going to read this. There's also a chapter on Jimmy Carter, whose death I expect any day. I imagine that will dominate the news when it happens. That's of interest anyway. There are a couple of other things in here, a couple of other chapters in here that I was primed to like or to find interesting because I once read a book on presidential writing, author-in-chief. And that is largely to do with post-presidencies, obviously. And a lot of the stories in that book were really good and really reminded me that I don't often pay attention to post-presidency lives and a lot of these people. So I was primed to read a lot of this. I confess, I read it out of order. I started with all the stuff about Taft. But when I was finished with the book itself is good. Very amiable, very readable. But when I was finished with the book itself, I realized that I probably can't read books like this now. And maybe not ever again. Post-presidencies. I probably can't do that. Because of current events. Same thing with the Ronan Farrow book. It's impossible for me to turn off my awareness of current events enough to read a book like this. Because when you think about, when I look at this subject matter, what presidents do when they're not president anymore, all I think about is the one and only president in American history who organized and launched a violent insurrection, a coup, to seize power, to stay in power, so that there would never be a life after power. And who was not executed for that. Was not jailed for that, is not incommunicado for that, and is not barred from politics for that. So he has spent his post-presidency fomenting rebellion, radicalizing half the country, more than half the country, so that their own relatives don't know them anymore. So that those families are ruined, they're shattered forever, whether he lives or dies, whether he seizes power again or not. We are living through that in this country. We're living through this rogue figure just being allowed to roam the land. When Department of Homeland Security should walk up to him at his next event and put 10 rounds in his head. That is an absolute matter of course. If you allow someone, a traitor who's a fomenter of violent rebellion, if you allow him to just keep doing that, you guarantee your country will fall. And yet that is being allowed. And that was all I could think about on every page of this book, which I know is not fair to Jared Cohen. I know that's not fair to his book. I can't imagine that he wrote this book without also thinking of that on every page. I can't imagine that wasn't on his mind. But probably he was telling himself, probably you will think, these stories still have to be told. History still has to be written. So maybe you will like this. If you are, for instance, I know there's quite a few of you who like to read presidential stuff, anything connected with the U.S. presidency. And some of you I know who love that, who read all the presidential biographies, any studies like that. Some of you I know have made the mental decision, I still want to do that, but I'm not going to read anything connected with Trump. Probably a wise decision, and maybe that works for you. That watertight compartment does not work for me. I learned when reading this book, it does not. So I don't know what I'm going to do with books like this. There's a study, for instance, coming out much later this year on the post-presidency of Ronald Reagan. I don't know how I'm going to read that. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I want to, but I don't know how I'm going to do it without thinking about this, without that just dominating the reading experience. So I don't know. I'll find out whether or not this as a test case. This book leads me to think I can't read these books anymore. But I'll test it with another book and we'll see. Then this next one is a reread. It's an older book. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And it's also a kind of suggested thing. The other day I did a raucous, wonderful talk with William Gallagher, the writer, from the YouTube channel 58 Keys. I strongly advise you to go over to his channel and subscribe. That would be wonderful. It was a wonderful chat. I can't wait to do it again. And during the course of that chat, he mentioned that he is rereading the Dalziel and Pascoe mysteries by Reginald Hill, which some of you may know from TV. There was a very winning series of productions of these novels on TV. Andy DL is a big, gruff policeman. He's not lettered, he's not educated, but he's really good at his job, really understands it, and is perfectly happy to slap someone around, to slap a wise guy around if they get in his way. And he has a smart, very handsome, very by-the-book, spit and polish, young colleague named Pascoe. And they spar throughout all of these books, and it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. The adaptations, most of them were wonderful, and the books are fantastic. Reginald Hill is such an incredible writer. One of his books begins with a description of Andy DL's eating over the course of only 12 hours. And it is bravura, just bravura as a stretch of prose. But when William Gallagher mentioned these books, he put that little bug in your head. That's all you need is for somebody to do that. So I reread a DL and Pascoe novel. I didn't think about a systematic reread of the whole series. I just picked one called On Beulah Height, with this modern cover. This is not the cover of the paperback that I have, but I didn't want to go herring around for paperbacks. So, and the cover here is very, very good, because this is the story of a drowned town. Before it was drowned, a collection of little girls went missing, and there was something evil there going on, and Andy DL was sure of that. But then, for a damming project, a civic reconstruction project, the town was evacuated and drowned. It was flooded, so it was buried underwater, and that was all. The unsolved crimes of that town, when it was still above ground, still above water, bothered Andy DL, but he went on. He went on with his life and just did other things. But now, thanks to drought, the town is coming alive again. The town is becoming visible again. And there's another girl. There's another crime. It almost like the implication here in the early parts of the book is that this is a cursed area. But Andy Dale doesn't believe that. He doesn't believe in curses. He believes in bad guys. And this is so good. It was so good. I haven't read this since it first came out, and I was really tempted. When I reread this, I was really tempted to just, reread a whole bunch of them. I was really tempted to do that. And I might. Then this next one is a bit of a disappointment. I guess we're going to do lots of disappointments on these Friday reads. This is by Alan Guelzo, the historian, who did a 1-volume history of the Battle of Gettysburg that is great. I loved it. I strongly, strongly recommend it. He did a book called Our Ancient Faith, Lincoln, Democracy, and the American Experience. And I was worried about this. Before I read a word of it, I was worried about it because the title and the subtitle make it seem like a book that's not written for a history-minded audience, but it instead is written for one reason and one reason only, to get you invited to the table on Morning Joe so that Joe Scarborough can introduce you and then talk over you for 15 minutes. And not let you get in a word edgewise about, cut to break, 5 commercials, come back from break, or for Joe Scarborough to say for the 50 millionth time, I'm just a simple country lawyer, or for him to interrupt Mika endlessly and talk over her endlessly. When I saw the package doing this, I thought, okay, this is meant for that. This is meant for our good old days, the grand golden values that make us American. Worthless stuff as history, in other words. Lincoln draws books like that, like meat draws flies. But his Gettysburg books was great, so I gave it a try, and unfortunately, it's mostly that. It's mostly just maundering. So I wish that I could recommend this. I can. Some of you are Lincoln fans, you're Lincoln fanatics, you'll read anything about the man. Well, Alan Guelzo is a great writer, and he's also an intelligent writer. You're getting 2 great Civil War era writers and chroniclers writing books this season, him and Harold Holzer. If you are so interested that you will read anything, well then, okay, then you'll read this, you'll probably get something out of it. Definitely test the water at the library first before you buy this new in hardcover. I would say that, definitely. I wish that I'd liked it a lot more. Then this next one is by Christine Kersey, and this was served up to me by those aggregator sites that I talk about on this channel. You give them your email, and you get a blast of notices every day about cheap books or free books, ebooks, the ebook deals that day. I signed up for this. I think I was alerted to it by one of you. I signed up for a bunch of these things thinking, well, nothing will come of it. And then I realized that every day, in addition to all of the cheap books, which you should not buy at all, any of them, but in addition to all the cheap books, there are also a barrage of free ebooks every day. And I just made a mental decision months and months ago when I did this. I made the mental decision, well, if a free ebook is offered to you in a daily deal that is in any way interesting to you, even a little, get it. It's as easy as be. You touch a button and it's sent to your Kindle, and that's it. So I did that, and in the intervening time, I must have sent hundreds of books to my Kindle. And I make a point of going through them, seeing which ones are any good. They're all indie titles. They're all self-published. None of them are new. I think the book that I want to show you next is from 2019. If that's actually true, then this would have been amazing to read then, I think. But I loved it. Thought it was fantastic. Just a wonderful hour's read. Just a wonderful, it's not Turgenev, it's just a wonderful hour's read. It's by Christine Kersey, and it's called Pandemic, The Beginning. It's book 1. It has a very doomsday, prepper cover there. But a large part of this book is very civilian. It's very suburban. You're not carrying all your belongings in a backpack with a rifle, worried about, marauding bandits and whatnot. Instead, the beginning of this book is about a pandemic sweeping the country. That at the beginning of the book, we get this through the eyes of one suburban family, a mother, the children, and the father. The mother is talking to her children at the beginning of the book, and they say to her, our prom's been canceled because of this flu that everybody seems to have. And for some reason, the mother has seen a whole bunch of coworkers call in sick and whatnot. For some reason, that drops the penny in her mind, and she realizes, okay, this is something. This isn't just the flu season. This is something. And she makes the decision right then, at the beginning of the book, tells her kids, you're not going to school today. All of her instincts take over. This is something. She calls her husband at work and says, could you work from home? Could you leave your office right now? And he thinks, well, what are you talking about? And she says, well, aren't a lot of people at your office sick? And he says, yeah. And she says, a lot more than usual? And he says, yeah. And eventually he decides to do that. He figures he'll swing by Costco, which for those of you outside the United States, you would not. Costco is the most quintessentially American thing you could possibly imagine. It's a gigantic warehouse for over-shopping. They're amazing places. You can only get there by car. So I'm only ever there if I have somebody with me, because I don't drive. But they are amazing. Just towering shelves, 100 feet tall, of crates and crates and crates of everything that you could want in any kind of bulk. He goes there. He figured, I'll go there, I'll fill the gas tank in the car, and I'll get a few things at Costco. And it's mobbed with people. And the people are a little bit desperate. It's not just mobbed like it would be at Christmas time. It's mobbed with people who are saying, okay, you're holding a jar of something. It's the last one. I really want that. I'm kind of tempted to try and snatch it from you. He's never seen anything like it. He gets what he wants and goes home. And we get more and more reports about how if this is the flu, it's got a 90% fatality rate. And it goes on from there. We watch very slowly in very straightforward prose. It's not bad prose, but it's very straightforward. It's not meant to be artsy-fartsy. This is pure plot over execution. And it's gripping. It really is. Again, it's not Dostoevsky. The characters don't have much depth. They're meant to stand in place of you just getting into the story. And it works that way. As the world slowly falls apart. And you're reading it now. I can only imagine what this would have been like to read in 2019. Probably, if this really did come out in 2019, this strikes me as a newer cover than you could have made in 2019. But if this really did come out in 2019, I can imagine the author got some emails from people saying, oh, you're really going overboard on this. Aren't you really exaggerating on this? Little guessing what was going to happen only the next year. Now, reading it with the pandemic, a lived experience in all of our lives, I found it fascinating. Not only because I was thinking, well, this could actually happen. What if a viral infection that's airborne? So not hard to transmit, in fact, extremely easy to transmit, did have a huge mortality rate, what would happen? What would happen? A huge amount would happen. It could bring a society to its knees. I really enjoyed this. Now, I think with a lot of the books that I get on those aggregator sites, I get the teaser. I get the first book in the series, and the others are not free, and there are others, lots of them. For all I know, this series has gone on and on, following the adventures of this family and maybe other people that they know. But, as I always say, if that exists, I am going to buy the next one. I'm not going to wait for it to go free. I'm going to buy it, because the author has done her job. She has earned me as a reader. So, I really enjoyed it. Grim reading, but I really enjoyed it. And then this next one is reread. I took a good long chunk of time and reread Lorna Doone. I've just recently found this as a Penguin classic, and it's florid, overwritten Victorian historical fiction. There were passages, especially action sequences in the end of the book, that are really, really effective. And the rest of it, you just have to be in the mood. You have to be in the mood for, I don't want to say cut rate Walter Scott, because this is really good. It was really good. You have to be in the mood for the way authors tell these big historical subjects. There's one particular character in this book. He is a focus of as much evil as good. He is, I would say, the main male character. And he is compelling. Very much so. Whenever he's on screen, so to speak, he is compelling. I don't regret the reread. I just found this for $1 at the Brattle, so I was glad to have it. I was glad to reread it. The paperback stood up well. And now I've reread Lorna Doone. I might, maybe it whet my appetite for Victober, but I don't foresee reading it again soon. There are other Victorian novels that I'd like to read again soon, including one that I might like to read to you. Give you a hint. It involves a big volcano. But I haven't decided on that yet. So this next one is John O'Connor. I haven't read this yet because I don't have a copy. Really be nice if Sourcebooks would change that fact. I don't have a copy, but it's right up my alley, for Pete's sake. It's The Secret History of Bigfoot. These are field notes for a North American monster. So this is concentrating on Sasquatch, particularly in North America, and probably particularly in the Pacific Northwest. Not the field notes that you could generate almost anywhere else in the world for a large anthropoid species that is not human. It's not any of the known apes, and it lives in wild territory and has repeated encounters with human beings. This will, I think, concentrate just on the famous one, the North American Bigfoot. And I don't know John O'Connor. I don't know that name. I know by now the names of a lot of Bigfoot field researchers. I don't know if he's one of them, or is he looking at the subject, from the comfort of his study on the East Coast. Oh, there are plenty of Bigfoot sightings on the East Coast as well. I don't know the tone of this or anything like that. Don't know. Is Field Notes ironic? Is this going to be a condescending book, or is it going to be real? Is it going to be mostly historical, or is it going to talk to a lot of eyewitnesses? No idea. But I will, if it's on this subject, I will read it. Because 90% of my brain says no. Absolutely not. There's never been a body. There's never been any clear footage. If we rule out the Patterson-Gimlin film of 100 years ago, if we rule that out, because I think when you watch it, I'm pretty sure that your instincts immediately say that's a guy in a gorilla suit. I think your instincts say that. And there's never been a body. There's never been clear footage, even though everyone in the world is now walking around with a high-definition camera, and a lot of people in the world would be happy to sacrifice their life if they could get posthumous fame and clicks and whatnot from being the person who finally films this thing. And there's also no secondary forensic evidence at all. No bones, no scat, no reliably identified hair or skin quality at all. No, nothing like that. Instead, what we have is footprints, of course, a huge amount of footprints, and also a gigantic amount of eyewitness accounts. Not all of which can be just scamming. That's not possible. I've read a huge number of these reports, and some of these people, a huge number of them, didn't expect to see what they saw, have no idea what it was, and aren't trying to be famous at all. So what did they see? Are you going to say that in every single one of those cases they were mistaking a bear? I'm not saying that won't be a large number of those cases. most people who aren't familiar with the wilderness don't really realize what bears look like, how they can move, how long they can spend on their hind legs. It would be easy. It is easy for a bear to fool you. Unless you're familiar with them. That's easy to do. Especially a black bear. But all of them? In all cases? No. And also, bears don't throw rocks. Apes throw rocks. Old world and new world monkeys, orangutans, gorillas, if you maybe made them do it, orangutans and gorillas and gibbons and humans. But humans especially throw rocks. Bears don't throw rocks. Moose don't throw rocks. And some rock throwing is fairly well documented. It's still anecdotal. Like I say, 90% of my brain says no. Because if these things existed, someone would have got a clear shot at one, either with a camera or with a gun. And that has never happened. And it would have happened. It would have happened. But 10% of my brain says, no, maybe not. In order for this thing to be completely hidden from the world, completely hidden from all the people that hike all over the Pacific Northwest every day, it would have to be preternaturally wary of humans. To an extent that you wouldn't credit with a raccoon or a bird or whatnot, until you remember that the thing that we're positing here is probably a great ape, maybe even a species of human. It would be capable of that kind of wariness, whereas no other animal would be. It's 10%. It's a sweet 10%. I love that 10%. I nurture it. So we'll see what this book does. We'll see what it says. This next one is by Matthew Sears. This is a work of history, ancient history. I loved it. I thought it was really, really good. Don't know what kind of wide distribution it's going to get or whether it's out yet. But it's Sparta and the Commemoration of War. It's about ancient Sparta and all of the usual mythology that you hear about an ancient warrior culture and whatnot. But it does a lot more than that. I thought, especially in the latter parts of the book. It does a lot more than that. It ends up being not just about Sparta, but about how Spartans thought about war. I loved it. Thought it was really, really good. Hope that it gets distribution. I don't imagine that it's going to get reviewed. And that's a shame. I'll have to review it myself. I'll see. I don't think I have a print copy of this. I'll have to see if whoever does it, I think it might be Cambridge University Press, we'll see if they can send me a copy. That would be nice. So I can show it to you. I'm showing it to you now. You definitely pre-order it. If you're an ancient history fan, you're definitely going to want this book. But it'd be nice if I could hold it up to you and show you the production detail. I'll see if they'll send me one. This next one, I haven't read it yet, but I've read this author. Her credit in the Bank of Steve could not be higher. She's the Queen of Summer. And summer should be here. I mean, it's the 2nd of February. It should be in the 70s in Boston by now. In ye olden times, sure, February was the heart of winter, but not anymore. But whenever this book comes out, I will read it. This is the Summer Book Club, and it's by Susan Mallory, the great Susan Mallory. If you're in the mood for this kind of reading, you cannot go wrong with this author. Wonderful, sassy ladies, complex personalities, always a darker trouble lurking in the back of the storyline. This will be about a book club, but there will be a darker trouble, at least one, that will be sensitively handled. That's all there is to it. It will be sensitively handled. These are satisfying summer reads, regardless of what season you read them in. I'm expecting that I will enjoy it, unless Susan Mallory drops the ball, in which case I'm not in contact with her. So if she drops the ball, I'll complain to Sarah at the Bookish Knitter about that, because it's got to be her fault somehow. And then this next one is by Corinne Michaels. It's part of a series. I don't know the series at all, but it's kind of a project of mine. A weird kind of project of mine. This is called Tempting Promises, and it is an enemies to lover romance novel. But the project of mine is not to read everything by Corinne Michaels or everything in this series. It's to read every romance novel that has Eric on the cover. That turns out to be a full-time job. He is on lots of covers. Understandably, since he's quite the dish. He's quite lavish in his handsomeness. But I sort of cavalierly early last year said, I'm going to read every book that has Eric on the cover. And I had no idea how much business he was getting, but he's getting a lot. He's on lots of covers. I will grin and bear it. And who knows? A couple of times in that project in 2023, it introduced me to a writer or a series that I do like, that I did like enough to continue, even when somebody not quite as blue steel is on the cover. We'll see. I will give this a try. I'm always up for a contemporary romance. And that is it. 45 minutes. That is a Friday Reads for you. Bouncing all over the map. But nevertheless, that's what you expect on this channel. And of course, with Friday Reads, I want to know, all of you who don't have BookTube channels, I want to know what your Friday Reads are. How are you coming along with things? Did you add anything new? Did you knock anything off the list? Thinking of any of those reading projects? Daniel at Guilty Feet made a video just recently about asking what is a reading project and what are the different kinds of them. And I loved it. I made a response video of my own talking about how I think every reader does reading projects of some kind or other, even if you don't officially designate it as such. And I've been bombarded with responses from people. You never know. On my channel, I don't know why any videos get responses of any kind, since everything is poorly lit and I'm a crusty old crank. But nevertheless, you never know what kind of responses any video is going to get. That one, I've been bombarded with responses, people talking about their reading projects. Maybe stuff that they hadn't even considered calling a reading project, but sure they do it. Absolutely. I'd love to know how your reading projects are coming, what you're doing, what essentially is your Friday Reads. That is if you don't have a BookTube channel. If you're just one of the hundreds of people who's in touch with me via email or Voxer. And if you have a BookTube channel, I'd love it if you'd make a Friday Reads instead of just Friday after Friday not doing that. Okay? Now, I said I would love to do that because I don't want to pull the curtain off the fact that Steve's will rules all, but nevertheless, if you have a BookTube channel, feel free to consider yourself strongly encouraged to make a Friday Reads. Maybe not today, because you've run out of time, but next Friday. Keep notes of your reading thoughts, your reading moods, any surprises. It doesn't have to be a different book, or 20 different books, or whatever. It just has to be what you're reading. I love these videos, and Steve would like to see more of them. And when Steve doesn't get what he likes, he starts to talk about himself in the third person, and nobody wants that. Right? So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.